I have a marathon goal, and it's an ambitious marathon goal. Delusional, some may say, although I think that's actually important. I'll get into that a little bit later, but first, let me set the stage for you. So I started running in 2020 during COVID when there really wasn't much else to do, to be honest. And after a few years of pretty casual running, I decided to do my first marathon in 2023. And this was the first time I had really followed a training plan or trained for anything so seriously for running. And I ended up running the marathon in 3 hours, 29 minutes, and 46 seconds. That time's important because recently I decided I want to set more delusional and ambitious running goals for myself, because if you never aim that high, then you're never going to reach those heights either. You still might not reach those heights even if you set that ambitious goal, but at least you're giving yourself a chance. And without dragging it out too much further, the ambitious goal I've set for myself is I want to take 1 hour off of my first marathon time. This means running a marathon in 2 hours, 29 minutes, and 46 seconds, which is an average pace of 3:33 per kilometer or 5:43 per mile, which isn't a particularly slow pace. And the reason this goal feels at least kind of delusional to me is I've run 4 marathons in my life so far. And that first one was the 3:29, but the second one was actually a 2:58 marathon, which meant I took 31 minutes off my PB there. After running that, I kind of assumed that I was going to continue to make big progress from marathon to marathon. Not necessarily taking off 31 minutes, obviously, but maybe 10 minutes and that sort of thing. But when I ran my third marathon over a year later, I only took 3.5 minutes off my PB and ran a 2:54. And most recently in my fourth marathon, which I ran about a month ago, I ran a 2:50, which was another 4 minutes off my PB. Now, don't get me wrong, taking 4 minutes off my PB is still pretty good, but I still have over 20 minutes to go between my current PB and the time I want to hit with that 2:29. So that's a big gap, and I'm not sure that just doing marathon block after marathon block will get me there. So I want to take a bit of a different approach to my training, not necessarily prioritizing the marathon in the short term, but focusing on just becoming a better runner overall. And that's really what this video is going to be all about. So what's this approach that I'm talking about? Basically, I'm not going to run a marathon again anytime soon. And instead, I'm going to focus on much shorter distances like the 5K and even ones shorter than that, like the 1500, the mile, and the 3000 meter. And the plan, at least for now, is to focus on these shorter distances for at least a year, if not even longer. Now, I don't know for sure how much this approach is going to work or not work, but I have seen some things and done some research that have given me at least a bit of confidence that this could be a viable way to significantly improve my marathon time. I'll get into those things now, and if you're someone that's also looking to PB and you're running across different distances, then maybe this will convince you to also do the same approach. So the thought that kind of put me in this direction of wanting to try the shorter distances and really commit to them was just looking at kind of the discrepancy between elite runners and how recreational runners get into the sport. If you look at the career and background of basically any top level marathon runner, they basically always started out running in high school or earlier in the shorter distances. So this would include things like cross country, the mile, the 5K, etc., not even close to marathon distance. Basically, these elite marathoners spent years developing their speed, and they did also develop their tolerance for high mileage and volume at the same time, which is also super important, and I'm going to touch on that, but the speed, I think, is kind of the bigger difference between these elite runners and what recreational runners do. When these elite runners have been racing the shorter distances in college and even as a professional runner potentially after college, when they decide to make the jump up to the marathon, more often than not, their fitness translates really well to the distance. If you look at recreational runners though, it's almost kind of the opposite thing going on. A lot of people that start running as adults will jump straight into the longer distances like the half marathon and the marathon and not really work on their speed that much, if at all. Now, this does make sense if the marathon is kind of like a bucket list item for someone. You know, they don't need to spend 5 years training their speed and building up their tolerance to high mileage just to run the only marathon they're ever going to run. But even for more competitive runners, this kind of pattern seems to be prevalent. And really when I noticed that distinction, I noticed that like a lot of other recreational runners, I had done basically the same thing. When I first started running, I spent years running just very casually once or twice a week. And the first race I actually signed up for as an adult was a half marathon. And then a year later, I did my first marathon. To this day, the shortest race I've actually done is still a 5K. So if you think about this kind of like a video game, game where you're a running character with different skills and attributes, my guess is a lot of strong amateur runners, let's say sub 3 hour marathoners, would be really high up on their aerobic base and that sort of thing, but their speed side of the skill tree, if you want to call it that, would be much lower in comparison. There's also the notion that some people are just going to be better suited to shorter distances and some people are better suited to longer distances. And a big part of that is going to be your makeup individually of type 2 and type 1 muscle fibers, or slow twitch or fast twitch muscles. And for me, I actually don't know which kind of runner I am because I've never really tried, honestly, to train for those shorter distances. So for all I know, I could be a lot better in those shorter distances relative to my marathon. So that's also part of the reason I'm curious about how that's going to go. Regardless of that, I think for myself, because I haven't really trained for those shorter distances and done those types of workouts really, I think it's a much more low-hanging fruit for me fitness-wise. My base at this point, while it's not elite or anything, it is probably a lot more developed than my speed is. I can do less work and improve my speed by a greater margin than I could my aerobic base at this point. But yeah, that's kind of the more intuitive argument, I guess, and why it kind of feels like this should work. But let's dive into some actual science behind this stuff. So while I was researching for this video, I came across a lot of articles that were basically saying, if you're a marathoner, you should try training for or racing a 5K. Kind of more so in the context of maybe dedicating a couple of months to that, which I'm kind of doing a more extreme version of that, I guess. But the points and the kind of benefits they brought up were pretty consistent across all the articles. And I'm talking about things like improving your VO2 max because you're going to be doing higher intensity and speed focused workouts, improving your ability to produce power as a runner, improving your running economy, all these sorts of things. I probably forgot something, but I'll put everything up on the screen here. And a lot of these benefits that you get from training for a 5K are really gonna push your ceiling higher as a runner. This is an analogy where I really like how Steven Scullion phrased it. Basically, you can think of having a ceiling and a floor as a runner. And for marathon running, the floor is actually going to be what's relevant because the intensity you run a marathon at isn't really all that high compared to, the maximum effort you're capable of. And so what's important for marathon running is actually raising up your floor to a higher level. But your floor can't go any higher than your ceiling. And really the less space there is between them, the harder it's going to be to push your floor up higher. With 5K training, you can actually raise up that ceiling, and this gives your floor more room to move and improve. There's also this principle called the speed gap, which comes from Steve Magness. And as far as I know, it's not super scientific or anything, but in principle, I agree with it and I think it makes sense. And the principle is basically that if you can increase your top end speed or your maximum speed by 1%, then in theory, all of your slower paces should also improve by 1%. So essentially, you can think of all of your paces as a percentage of your maximum speed. And another important part of this principle is that if your goal marathon pace is 3:33 per kilometer, like it is for me, but your 5K pace is 3:30 per kilometer, then obviously that's far too little of a gap and there's no way your marathon pace can be that close to your 5K pace. But if you're able to get your 5K pace down to 3:05 per K, then there's enough of a gap there where your marathon pace can actually get to where it needs to be. But there is a big piece of this puzzle that we can't ignore, and that's gonna be volume. I mentioned this earlier when I was talking about elite runners and their background, but there is an unquestionable correlation between your volume, in other words, how much time you spend running each week, and your performance and success in the marathon, and really in any event that's predominantly aerobic, which the 5K is part of. Also, I remember seeing a bunch of video clips recently of elite runners getting all asked the same question and all answering it the same way.
Do you think most runners benefit more from higher volume or better execution of key sessions?
Definitely higher volume.
Consistency and high volume, without a doubt, are the best.
Especially as I've increased my mileage a little bit this block.
I ran probably for 3 years, 140 to 160K a week.
Volume is king for a reason, and there are studies that show that spending more time running each week is linked to better marathon performance. So I'm not going to throw volume and mileage to the wayside. In fact, I'm actually going to do the opposite. I'm going to try and continue to keep increasing my mileage safely and gradually over time. This is a gradual process though, and not something that you can really rush. And actually in the short term now, as I've pivoted to 5K training and 5K workouts, I've had to actually reduce my weekly mileage because of the higher intensity of the workouts. My body's had to adapt to get used to that style of workouts, and recovery's been a bit slower, but I'm hoping as my body adapts, I'll be able to try and increase my mileage and slowly ramp it back up again. So that's really the gist of it. I want to target the things that I haven't really focused on in running so far, and hopefully that will make me a better runner overall, while also giving me bigger fitness gains in less time. Now, I don't know when my next marathon is going to be. If I had to guess, it's probably going to be in 2028, if anything, but whenever I do that next marathon, I don't want to take 2 or 3 or 4 minutes off. I'm hoping I'm gonna take 10 plus minutes off of my current PB. And in order to make that kind of jump possible, I think I really need to level up in the 5K and the shorter distances first. So my current 5K PB is a 17:27, and I think I'd wanna be hovering around the low 16-minute kind of times at least before I consider going back to the marathon. And really, if I can get my 5K down to that point, I think I will have leveled up as a runner speed-wise, and hopefully that'll make the kind of marathon pace that's necessary to run 10 minutes faster than my current PB feel a lot easier. So that's the goal. I want to take 1 hour off my first marathon time, and I'm going to be documenting everything here from my training and everything I learn and all that sort of stuff. So if you want to see how it goes and follow along, you can subscribe to catch all my future videos on this as well. I know it's not going to be easy by any means, and it's probably going to be a bumpy road, but I think not knowing that it's possible for sure is what'll make this feel all that more rewarding if I do ever get there. So let's see what happens. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Peace.